1990. A hot summer afternoon in an affluent neighborhood of Rome, 20-year-old Simonetta Cesaroni was working alone in an office in Via Carlo Poma, not far from the most famous sights of Rome. When she didn't return for dinner, her parents thought maybe she had to work late. There are always extra things to do right before the big August holiday. But by 9:30 p.m., they knew something was off. They didn't actually know where she was working that afternoon, so they had to be investigators themselves. And together the parents, the older sister Paola, her boyfriend, and Simonetta's boss, they finally arrived to Via Carlo Poma No. 2. Here in the offices of the Association of Italian Youth Hostels, they found Simonetta Cesaroni, 20 years old, brutally murdered, a total of 29 stab wounds on her face, her chest, and her genitals. Who killed this young woman in such a vicious way? To investigators, it looked personal. It looked like a crime of passion. This murder still has the power to make front-page news 33 years later. This case is known as the delitto di Via Poma. This is the story of Simonetta Cesaroni. Hello and benvenuti to Italian True Crime. Simonetta Cesaroni had humble beginnings. She was born on November 5, 1969, in the periferia, or outskirts of Rome, living with her parents and older sister in an area called Don Bosco. The Roman periferia was made up of anonymous palazzi, or apartment buildings, housing the thousands of people that had until only recently lived a more gentle agricultural lifestyle, but had come to the city in droves for more opportunity of employment. Simonetta, at 20, didn't have her own bedroom, but slept on a couch in the dining room of the family apartment. For less than a year, she had been working for an accounting firm located near her home. The two owners of the firm had recently decided to send Simonetta to a client 2 afternoons per week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. The client was the regional offices of the Italian Association of Youth Hostels, and here she would insert financial information into a computer a few hours per week. This office was located on the other side of Rome from Simonetta. She would be working in one of the most elegant parts of the Italian capital, known as Prati, close to the Vatican and on a small street called Via Carlo Poma. This area was and is an affluent neighborhood and is considered one of the safest due to its proximity to the Vatican. Tourists don't always end up in this part of Rome. Though it is right in the center and close to major attractions, it doesn't have any well-known landmarks. Some come for shopping or maybe to pass through after visiting nearby Vatican City or the Castel Sant'Angelo. But for Simonetta, a modest young girl from the periferia, Via Carlo Poma would have been pure culture shock, especially back in 1990 when there was far less mobility than today. Rome 1990. Any time is a good time to be in Rome, but 1990 was exceptional. The 80s were Italy's heyday. The economy was booming and Italians were enjoying the good life. Later in the 90s, there would be a reckoning, with the Mani Pulite craze uncovering corruption and crime at the highest levels, but that was still a few years off. In 1990, Italy was hosting the FIFA World Cup, and Rome was to host the finals. Italy came in third that year. Anything less than being champion is disappointing for a country like Italy, but they beat England for third, so that was good news. And the final game was played between Argentina and Germany, two powerhouses in the world of football. The winner that year was Germany, West Germany to be exact, and this was the last tournament to feature a team from West Germany, as a few months later would be the reunification with East Germany. The excitement of the finals wrapped up in July, and now it was the beginning of August 7th to be exact, a Tuesday, right at the beginning of the long holiday season when Rome empties out and the beaches fill up. In fact, probably by Tuesday, August 7th, a good portion had left or were wrapping up last-minute affairs. That fateful day in 1990, Simonetta had worked all morning as usual at the accounting firm near her home. In taped interviews with investigators, her mother spoke of that day and the last time she saw her daughter, how Simonetta came home for lunch a little after 1 p.m. that Tuesday in August. She left her things by the door and joined her mother at the table. Her mother had prepared for her a fresh risotto alla pescatore, and they ate together. The mother spoke of how Simonetta didn't eat much. She didn't seem hungry. Simonetta didn't stay too long at the table. She got up and went into a separate room, closed the door, and had a phone conversation that, according to the mother, lasted a long time. To this day, we don't know who was on the other end. We do know it wasn't one of her close friends, nor was it her boyfriend. Because of this long call, she was now running late to get to her afternoon client in Via Poma. It was already 3 p.m. There was a problem with her car that made it unusable, and so she asked her sister Paola to give her a ride to the metro stop. It was an oppressively hot afternoon in Rome in August. There had been summer storms all morning, and the humidity was peaking. Simonetta brought her pink umbrella just in case. Paola dropped her little sister at the metro station, and as Simonetta turned to wave, she disappeared into the underground metro stop, and that was the last time any of her loved ones saw her alive. Simonetta's work hours at her client, the youth hostel offices, were from 3:30 p.m. to 7 p.m. Simonetta made a call from the office at 5:30 to Luigia Berrettini, reported at times as a work call and at times as a friend. She then had a planned phone call with one of her bosses from the accounting firm, Salvatore Volponi, at 6:20 p.m., a standing call when at the client to update him on her progress. Volponi never received this call and noted it as strange due to Simonetta's reliable nature. He wouldn't have thought it cause for concern particularly until later. At 7:40 p.m., her mother at home began to worry. It seems early for her to start to worry, but this is when she and her husband remember they started to ask each other and their older daughter Paola where Simonetta was and why she wasn't home yet. Simonetta was known by her family to be extremely responsible and was the type to call with any update no matter how small, even leaving a few minutes later than usual. Maybe this was so as not to worry her parents, or maybe this was just due to her nature as an accountant, a precise way of looking at the world. Knowing that Simonetta wasn't using her car, the sister Paola and Paola's boyfriend took their Vespa and rode back and forth between the house and the metro stop, hoping to catch her at some point simply on her way home. After an hour or so, the family realized they needed to go look for her at the last place they knew she must have been. They needed to go to the office where she was working that afternoon. A recurring theme in this case is the characterization of Simonetta as very private and reserved. Simonetta's family didn't know much about where their daughter worked or what she did. Luckily, one of the times that Paola had driven her sister to the metro stop, Simonetta pointed out where her boss Volponi lived. The big sister and her boyfriend hurried over there. Volponi was home and now more worried than ever, telling the family that he hadn't heard from her at 6:20 as planned, and now it was about 9:30. Strangely, he claimed he didn't even know where she was working, which sounds strange to us and later sounded strange to investigators, but he said his business partner handled the work with clients. Once they tracked down the business partner, who was able to give them the address, this band of worried family members rushed to Via Carlo Poma No. 2. Now it was 11:30 p.m., and the wife of the building attendant was the only one present and able to let them in with a spare key. Inside the office, they finally found young Simonetta in a brutal scene of murder that would captivate the nation from north to south. Soon the quiet, elegant neighborhood was full of sirens, police, and investigators. Simonetta had 29 stab wounds. It looked like she had been stabbed with a letter opener, but whatever the weapon was, it has still never been found. According to the autopsy and the reconstruction, she was hit on the back of the head to stop her from running. Once on the ground, the killer sat on her and immobilized her with his knees, according to the large bruises on the side of her hips. At this point, she was stabbed first on her face 6 times, including both of her eyes. She was stabbed 9 times along her torso, breasts, and stomach, and 14 times around her genital area. A bite mark was reported to be on her left breast, though this result was disputed by experts later as being insufficient evidence and not clearly a bite mark. There were no signs of sexual assault, though it was included in a report that investigators thought maybe the killer had intended to sexually assault Simonetta, and when, unable to do so, became so angry that he murdered her in a fit of rage. The autopsy result gave the estimated time of death between 6 and 6:30 p.m. Simonetta's body was found in a different office from the one where she was working. It is thought that she started to run, heading into the further office to escape her murderer, thus getting hit on the back of the head. She was found completely naked, except for her white socks still on and her bra attached but pulled down. Her top was placed on her stomach, covering several stab wounds. The rest of her clothing wasn't there, nor was the jewelry she had been wearing, such as a gold ring, bracelet, earrings, and necklace. Her watch was the only item left on her body. Simonetta's shoes were found in a corner near the door with no blood, maybe due to a habit of not wearing shoes inside, especially considering she was alone and there was no one to see her working in the office in her socks. Her purse was still in the office, but the office keys that she methodically kept in her purse were not there. The office was otherwise clean and orderly. There were no other signs of theft or any additional struggle. There was blood found on the door handle, and in the room out of place was a paper that had the letters C-E, a picture of a daisy, and the words "dead OK." This seemed like key evidence for a while, until eventually a police officer present that night and responding to the call admitted to making this note himself and leaving it behind by accident. The first suspect was one of the building attendants for Via Carlo Poma No. 2. Pietrino Vanacore was one of 4 building attendants. The building attendants, or portiere, often live in a small apartment inside the building with their family, and they are in charge of the safety and security of the building. They ensure the cleanliness of the common area and are the point of contact for all the residents of the building. This is an important figure in Italy and can often be some very funny character that everyone in the neighborhood knows, and often the portiere has all the gossip. Pietrino was so happy to have this job, and he and his wife lived right in one of the most beautiful parts of Rome. All 4 attendants and their wives were together that afternoon from 4 p.m. to 8 p.m. Pietrino was on duty at the B entrance, which included the office of the youth hostels and was the entrance to the office where Simonetta was working. The group of 8 people was together in the courtyard near that entrance, and they were all each other's alibi. Pietrino, however, was absent from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m., as reported by the others. This was a stunning revelation to investigators. They began to investigate Pietrino and found blood on his trousers and socks. They also found that he had gone to a nearby hardware store right before 5:30 and purchased an angle cutter, and that he had lied about the time at which he came to a resident's office to help with a maintenance issue, saying he arrived at 10, but the resident claimed he arrived late and it was actually 11. Pietrino Vanacore was arrested 3 days after the murder on August 10th. He spent 26 days in jail as the prosecutors tried to build a strong case. However, everything was showing that he was innocent. The blood on his pants and socks was all his own. He suffered from hemorrhoids. He had worn the same clothes for 3 days, from August 6th to August 8th, and according to the crime scene investigators, the murderer would have had Simonetta's blood all over his clothes. Even the blood on the handle was found not to be compatible with poor Pietrino. After almost a month in jail, Pietrino was released and eventually gained a full and complete exoneration 5 years later in 1995. Somehow, poor Pietrino was not safe from further investigation, and as late as 2009 somehow was back on the police radar as they found new evidence. This line of investigation was soon dropped. However, he never recovered from the suspicion, and finally, in 2010, committed suicide by jumping into the sea. He even left a very short note about the suffering he has endured from this case. Because this is Italy and there have to be several conspiracy theories, some believe that his suicide was actually murder, as he was supposed to testify 3 days later regarding Simonetta's murder. He was found drowned in very little water, adding to the conspiracy theory. We all wonder what his testimony would have been. In the course of the investigation, Simonetta's boyfriend would of course become a suspect. Her boyfriend was Raniero Busco, 5 years her senior. He had originally been overlooked as he had a solid alibi and the police were focused on Pietrino. The police had gathered evidence back in 1990, but there was not much that could be done yet with the DNA that was found. In 2005, the police began to test items from the crime scene that contained traces of blood or saliva. They collected DNA samples from 30 suspects of the crime. Most of the DNA was unusable. However, there was saliva found on the bra and top, and it was a match only to Raniero. This was the boyfriend, however, so that could be expected. However, Simonetta's sister Paola testified that Simonetta had worn newly cleaned garments that day. The more they looked into Raniero, the more guilty he seemed. Dental experts testified that his bite was compatible with the bite marks on the left breast, and his alibi fell apart. He said he had been with a friend at a garage to fix his friend's motorcycle. However, in court his friend testified that they didn't see each other that evening until 7:30 p.m., that earlier he was at his aunt's nursing home. Pietrino's wife, Giuseppe De Luca, who was present near the B entrance and stairway the evening of the murder, testified as an eyewitness to seeing a man about 1.80 m or 5'11" at 6 p.m. coming down the stairs. He left fairly quickly, keeping his head down, carrying a bundle under his left arm, and wearing a hat and dark clothes. She gave this testimony back in 1990, immediately after the murder, and had said at the time she thought it was one of two residents. Either Fabio Forza, who lived inside the building but at the time was on vacation in Turkey, or Salvatore Sibiglia, an employee of the same office where Simonetta was working, but he also had a solid alibi and was not in the area at that time. Now that the police were looking at Raniero, this eyewitness testimony could be part of the evidence against her boyfriend. Raniero was convicted on January 26, 2011 of homicide and sentenced to 24 years in prison. Raniero's team appealed the verdict, and a little over 1 year later he was acquitted. It turns out he did have a solid alibi. He was at work and now had witnesses. Additional dental and medical experts in the meantime had determined that the bite mark was actually some other form of bruise or indentation and was not teeth. And finally, it was determined that the saliva found on Simonetta's bra could have survived a light wash, and Simonetta's mother described her technique to wash the bras, which was hand wash only with very little washing powder. His acquittal was finalized by the Court of Cassation on February 26, 2014. 7 years of my life have been destroyed, Raniero said after the final decision. I can understand what the family feels, that after 24 years there is no culprit. But everyone should also understand my drama, and now I want to be left alone. 2 other suspects were heavily investigated. One was Salvatore Volponi, one of Simonetta's bosses from the accounting firm. According to the crime scene, they believed that the killer knew Simonetta would be alone in the office at that time, and was someone that Simonetta knew enough to let into the office, that or a person who had a key, as there were no other signs of forced entry. One person this fit was her boss, Salvatore, and some of his statements struck police as strange. However, his blood wasn't a match. Back in 1990, with the blood found on the crime scene, they could at the very least match type, and his blood was not the same type as the killer's found at the scene. He would be involved for years in this case, being asked to testify. He suffered health and mental health issues, and this ongoing unsolved mystery really affected him. The son of one of the residents of the B stairway was also accused and investigated. In the end, there wasn't much on him, and again, the conspiracy theorists feel that this time spent investigating an innocent man was part of a giant misdirection campaign as part of a cover-up. There were alternative theories pursued over the years. Simonetta's mother told police that in the past few weeks, her daughter had confided in her that she was receiving harassing phone calls at work. Only the mother had this information. Simonetta had not spoken about this with her friends or boyfriend, and we don't know much more than this. In 1995, an anonymous letter arrived to police. It suggested they looked into Simonetta's use of Videotel. Videotel was the 80s and 90s internet in Italy. Similar to Minitel in France, it was a videotext telematics service used by the public from about 1985. Monitors were rented from the monopoly phone company, and often businesses would have a few terminals at work where you could check stock prices, buy airline tickets, and there was even the beginnings of online chatting. It was a WhatsApp or chat room of 30 years ago. In France, there was a Minitel in most homes, but in Italy it was less ubiquitous. There was a Videotel terminal in the offices of the youth hostels, and as Simonetta was there alone, the anonymous letter pointed at the fact that maybe she was using that terminal for chatting and had possibly met someone online. Possibly someone that was coming to meet her in the isolated office. Could this have been one of the first cases of online vulnerability? A witness came forward saying they had met Simonetta online and that she had used the name Veronica. This lead was followed, but there was doubt that the terminal in the youth hostel office was ever used in this way, and eventually the Videotel motive was closed for good. Also in this large window of investigative time, mysterious details were emerging about the offices of the youth hostels. At the time of the murder, this region of the Italian Association of Youth Hostels was overseen by a lawyer of the name Francesco Caracciolo. Rumors began to swirl about Caracciolo's involvement with the Secret Service and that he used these offices to manage Italian Secret Service activities. One person that was spreading these rumors was an Austrian businessman Roland Voller, who was a police informant and was in possession of Italian Secret Service documents. One possibility was that Simonetta had uncovered illicit activities and was taken out. The rumor here goes into further detail, that the illicit activities were contracts involving dubious organizations involved in Italy's role in Somalia and its ongoing instability. And in case it wasn't specifically these contracts that Simonetta may have come across, there are other possibilities. There is another rumor that in the office's archives were secret documents that testified to the alleged favors made by the same youth hostel association in favor of the Banda della Magliana with the approval of the Vatican and with the complicity of the secret services. The Banda della Magliana was a criminal organization operating from 1975 to 1993 in Rome and most of the surrounding region of Lazio, and was considered the most powerful and violent group that operated in Rome in that time period. In fact, just about the time of the murder, evidence had come to light that there was complicity between the Banda and the Secret Service. There has been evidence that the lawyer specifically asked for Simonetta to be there that afternoon. The police searches of the youth hostel offices never returned any secretive documents, though I suppose that is the point. So here we are today. The family, after over 30 years, has no closure. They still don't know what happened to Simonetta. They don't know why, and they don't know who. And so many peripheral people have suffered from a case that doesn't seem to want to close itself, stubbornly staying open with new leads, anonymous letters, misdirection, and conspiracy theories. And this is how the case of Via Poma, as it has been called over the years, became one of those many unsolved Italian mysteries. A bit like Jean-Benet Ramsey or Amy Mihaljevic, consisting of exhausting research, years of vague hypotheses, passing the baton between persons of interest, and finally developing into a complicated and intricate story that has remained suspended in time. Thank you for listening to Italian True Crime, the English-language podcast for Italophiles. Today's case happened before I moved to Italy, but has always been widely reported on in the 2000s. What really stuck out to me about this case were the pictures of Simonetta. To me, she symbolized the young, beautiful Italian woman, posing on the beach for the camera before the days of the selfies. Not really knowing where her picture would end up, not knowing that someday every Italian would see her there posing on the beach, forever 20 years old.